At a crowded auction, a weak and overlooked quarter horse stood in the shadows, ignored and dismissed as worthless. But one fearless young woman saw beyond the frailty, took a chance, and what unfolded next turned disbelief into awe, leaving those who rejected him in absolute shock. The sun sat high in the cloudless sky, casting an unforgiving heat over the dusty auction grounds. The dry air clung heavily to the chatter of ranchers and buyers bustling about. The rhythmic clink of chains and the occasional restless whinny of horses added to the noise. Men in wide-brimmed hats moved purposefully, their sharp eyes evaluating each animal for strength, beauty, and potential. For the prized horses, the auction was alive with energy, cheers erupted, bids were shouted, and pride gleamed in the faces of buyers. But away from all the excitement, tucked in the shadow of a wooden fence, stood a horse that no one seemed to notice. He was a frail quarter horse, his dull coat marred by scars and patches of missing hair. His legs quivered as he stood, his ribs clearly visible beneath his thin skin. His head hung low, as if the weight of the world had pressed him into submission. And his eyes spoke volumes. They held no fight, no fire, just a deep sadness and a faint glimmer of hope that someone, anyone, might see him. Nearby, a gruff voice broke the quiet corner's stillness. "That one? Might as well throw him to the dogs," a rancher said with a sneer, tipping his hat back. "He's not fit for anything." "Yeah," another chimed in with a dark chuckle. "No way that thing'll pull a plow, let alone run. Waste of space if you ask me." The horse didn't flinch. He didn't even lift his head. It was as if he'd heard it all before and resigned himself to their cruelty. Through the crowd, however, came a figure that stood out. A young woman, not much older than 20, walked with quiet determination. Ellie wasn't dressed like the other bidders. Her simple jeans were worn, patched in places, and her boots bore the scuffs of years of hard work. A dusty gray shirt hung loose over her lean frame, and her auburn hair was tied back into a practical braid. What set her apart most, though, was the look in her eyes, a gaze filled with purpose, unshaken by the wealth or arrogance of those around her. Ellie wandered past the finest horses without stopping. Her grandfather's words rang in her mind, "Never judge a horse by its looks. What matters lies beneath the surface." When she reached the neglected corner of the yard, her steps slowed. Her gaze fell on the frail quarter horse, and her breath caught in her chest. The closer she got, the more she could see the pain etched into his body. Yet it wasn't his scars or his trembling legs that struck her the most, it was his eyes. Behind the sorrow, she caught a glimpse of something deeper, the faintest spark of life, like a dying ember begging for air. "What's your story?" Ellie murmured softly, resting her hands on the rough wooden fence. Her voice carried warmth, but the horse didn't move. He stood motionless, as if unsure whether to trust this unexpected kindness. "Why waste your time, miss?" a stout man nearby called out, a smirk on his face. He leaned casually against the fence, watching her with a mix of amusement and disdain. "That one's no good. Ain't got strength, and it's scared of its own shadow. Useless, I'm tellin' ya." Ellie ignored him. She reached out a hand, moving slowly, and waited. The horse stiffened, his muscles taut with fear. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, as if testing the waters, the horse leaned forward and let his nose brush her fingers. The touch was fleeting, but it was enough to make Ellie's decision. When the auctioneer brought the horse forward, his voice lacked the energy he'd had for the others. "Next up, we've got a young quarter horse here," he announced flatly, waving his hand toward the pen. "Needs care. Might be worth something to someone, I suppose." The crowd fell silent. No one raised a hand. A few chuckles rippled through the onlookers. "I'll take him," Ellie called out, her voice cutting through the whispers. Heads turned in her direction, their expressions a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You can't be serious," someone muttered. "What are you gonna do with that skeleton?" another shouted, laughing. Ellie stood her ground, ignoring the noise. She stepped forward and looked the auctioneer in the eye. "What's the price?" she asked, her tone steady. The man raised an eyebrow, almost amused by her determination. "Minimum bid. $50, he said with a shrug. Reaching into the worn leather pouch slung over her shoulder, Ellie pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Here," she said, handing them over. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, almost relieved to have the horse off his hands. As she led the horse out of the pen, Ellie could feel the stares and hear the murmurs behind her. "What a waste of money. She'll regret that for sure." Ellie paid them no mind. She kept her focus on the horse, now walking hesitantly beside her. As she stroked his neck, she spoke softly. "I'll call you Chance," she said. "Because you deserve one. And I promise you this, no one's ever going to overlook you again." The journey home was long. The dusty trail stretched on for miles, lined with dry grass and swaying trees. Chance stumbled often, his legs weak from neglect. Each time, Ellie stopped to let him rest. She spoke to him in soothing tones, encouraging him to keep moving. "We're almost there," she whispered. "Just a little farther." By the time they reached Ellie's small ranch, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her modest home, made of weathered wood, stood in the distance, flanked by a small stable and a fenced corral. On the porch sat her grandfather, his gray hair gleaming in the fading light as he whittled a piece of wood. When he saw her approach, he squinted, setting the carving aside. "What's this you've brought home?" he asked, rising slowly and resting his hands on his hips. "His name's Chance," Ellie replied, stopping in front of him. Her voice was firm, though her heart pounded in her chest. "He's mine." Her grandfather's sharp eyes assessed the horse. He circled him, noting every scar, every protruding rib. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "You've got your work cut out for you," he said. "A horse like this doesn't just need food and water. He'll need patience. A lot of it." Ellie nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. Her grandfather's expression softened, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well then," he said, clapping her shoulder. "Welcome home, Chance." As the day ended, Ellie stood by the corral, watching Chance as he tentatively explored his new surroundings. The road ahead would be long, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. But as she saw him lift his head for the first time, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, she knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning of their journey. The next morning's sunlight crept over the horizon as Ellie stirred in her small, cozy bed. She had barely slept, her mind running through all the things Chance might need. A horse like him, broken in spirit, worn in body, wouldn't recover overnight. This was going to take effort, patience, and love in ways she had never experienced before. By the time she stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of hay and damp earth. Ellie approached the corral where Chance stood, his thin frame outlined against the pale dawn light. His head was low, his eyes half closed, and the untouched hay from the night before lay scattered around him. He looked defeated, as if he didn't believe in the possibility of better days. "Good morning, Chance," Ellie said softly, resting her hands on the rough wooden fence. Her voice was gentle, soothing, and she made no sudden movements. Chance's ears flicked in her direction, but his body remained tense. Ellie climbed into the corral carefully, 1 foot at a time, and crouched a few feet away from him. She didn't try to approach him or make him do anything. Instead, she sat quietly, allowing her presence to speak for itself. The minutes ticked by in silence. Ellie pulled a small, tattered book from her jacket pocket, her grandfather's guide to horse care, and began reading aloud. Her voice was steady, calm. "Horses, like people, need connection. Trust is built slowly, with consistent kindness." She glanced up occasionally, hoping Chance would inch closer, but he stayed where he was, as if frozen by years of mistreatment. Patience became Ellie's mantra. Every morning, she repeated the same routine. She would bring fresh hay, clean water, and sit in the corral, reading or talking softly. Sometimes she spoke about her late parents, how much her small ranch meant to her, and the dreams she had for the future. "This ranch needs a second chance, too," she said one day. "Kind of like you." Over the first week, small changes began to emerge. Chance started eating when Ellie was nearby, though his movements were cautious and slow. He flinched less at the sound of her voice, and one afternoon, he lifted his head to watch her as she moved around the corral. Ellie caught the moment and froze, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fill her with hope. One particularly chilly morning, Ellie decided it was time to take the next step. Armed with a makeshift rope she had fashioned into a halter, she stood by the gate, debating whether Chance was ready. Her grandfather, leaning against the porch railing, called out to her. "Think he'll follow you?" he asked, his tone skeptical but not unkind. "He will," Ellie replied, more confidently than she felt. Chance's dark eyes followed her movements as she entered the corral. She approached slowly, her hands outstretched, the rope hanging loosely at her side. "Hey, boy," she whispered. "Let's go for a little walk." As she stepped closer, Chance stiffened, his muscles twitching. Ellie stopped in her tracks, holding her position. "It's okay," she murmured. "I won't hurt you. I promise." She waited, her heart pounding, until Chance relaxed just enough for her to slip the rope over his head. His breathing quickened, and he pulled back slightly, but Ellie didn't react. She let the moment pass, giving him time to adjust. When she finally guided him toward the gate, his first step was hesitant, his legs shaky. Ellie walked beside him, her pace slow and steady. "That's it," she said softly. "One step at a time." The pair made their way out of the corral and onto the dirt path that wound through the ranch. The morning sun bathed the fields in golden light, and the air was filled with the distant chirping of birds. Chance stumbled several times, his legs unused to the movement, but Ellie stopped to let him rest whenever he faltered. She stroked his neck gently, her voice a quiet reassurance. "We're just walking, boy. Nothing to be afraid of." As they reached a small patch of grass, Ellie let Chance graze. He lowered his head cautiously, nibbling at the green blades. Ellie crouched nearby, watching him. For the first time, she noticed a subtle change in his posture. His head wasn't hanging as low, and there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. She smiled, fighting back tears. "See? You're stronger than you think." The walk back to the corral was slow but steady. Chance seemed less hesitant, his steps more deliberate. Ellie's grandfather was waiting for them at the gate, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He nodded approvingly as they passed. "You're earning his trust," he said. "That's a start." Over the following days, Ellie continued these small outings, gradually increasing their duration. She never pushed Chance too hard, always letting him set the pace. With each walk, he seemed to grow a little braver. He began to lift his head more often, his ears perking at the sounds of the ranch. Ellie noticed the way his muscles, though still weak, started to fill out as he ate regularly and moved more. One afternoon, while Ellie was brushing Chance's coat, a task that had taken weeks of patience to achieve, her grandfather approached with a thoughtful expression. "You've got a real gift with him," he said, leaning on the fence. "But don't forget, trust goes both ways. He's learning to trust you, but you need to trust him, too." Ellie nodded, absorbing his words. She thought about them later that night as she sat by the corral under the stars. Chance stood nearby, his silhouette outlined by the moonlight. He seemed calmer now, more at peace. Ellie rested her arms on the fence, her heart full of gratitude. "We've got a long road ahead," she whispered. "But we're in this together." Ellie's morning routine became a ritual of patience and quiet determination. The sun rose over the ranch each day, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, as she carried buckets of fresh water and bundles of hay to Chance's corral. While the world outside seemed to rush by, time in the corral slowed to a crawl, each moment stretching into a lesson in trust and resilience. Chance had begun to show subtle signs of improvement. He no longer flinched at every movement Ellie made. His body, though still frail, moved with slightly more ease, and his once dull eyes now followed Ellie's every step. For Ellie, these tiny victories were as monumental as winning a championship. One morning, as she prepared to clean Chance's stall, she found him standing at the gate, his ears pricked forward. "Well, look at you," she said, her voice bright with surprise. "Are you waiting for me now?" Chance didn't respond, of course, but Ellie swore there was something curious in his gaze, as if he were beginning to see her as more than just another human. As she worked, Ellie spoke to him, narrating her chores in a calm, steady tone. "You know, my dad used to say that horses are mirrors of their riders," she said, brushing away the old bedding in his stall. "If you're calm, they'll be calm. If you're scared, they'll feel it too. Guess that means I've got to be extra patient with you, huh?" Chance flicked his tail lazily, his body relaxed in a way Ellie hadn't seen before. She smiled, taking it as a sign of progress. After finishing her chores, Ellie decided it was time to introduce something new into their routine: grooming. Carrying a soft brush and a bucket of warm water, Ellie approached Chance slowly. "All right, buddy, let's see how you feel about this," she said. She extended her hand, letting him sniff the brush first. Chance hesitated, his nostrils flaring slightly, but he didn't pull away. Encouraged, Ellie began gently brushing his coat, starting at his neck and moving in slow, deliberate strokes. At first, Chance stiffened under her touch, his muscles taut with uncertainty. Ellie kept her movements light and reassuring, murmuring words of encouragement. "It's okay, Chance. You're safe here. I promise." Gradually, she felt him relax, his body softening as he grew accustomed to the sensation. Ellie worked carefully, mindful of the scars that marred his skin. Some of them were old and faded, while others were more recent, each one a painful reminder of the neglect he'd endured. As she brushed away the dirt and grime, Chance's coat began to reveal a faint sheen beneath the dullness. "There you are," Ellie said softly. "You're starting to look like the beautiful horse I knew you could be." Her grandfather watched from the porch, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. "You've got a knack for this," he called out, his tone a mix of pride and amusement. "But don't get too comfortable. That horse's real test is gonna be out there in the field, not in that corral." Ellie glanced at Chance, then back at her grandfather. "We'll get there," she said, her voice steady. "One step at a time." The day Ellie decided to take Chance beyond the safety of the corral felt like a milestone. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze rustled the grass as she prepared the makeshift halter. Chance stood quietly by the gate, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Today's the day," Ellie said, slipping the halter over his head. "We're going to see a bit more of the world." As she led him out onto the dirt path, Chance's steps were hesitant, his ears flicking at every unfamiliar sound. A bird darted from a nearby bush, and he froze, his muscles coiled with tension. Ellie stopped immediately, giving him time to process the moment. "It's just a bird," she said gently, stroking his neck. "Nothing to worry about." With each step, Ellie could feel Chance's confidence growing. They walked along the path, passing fields of tall grass that swayed in the breeze. Chance's head lifted slightly, his ears swiveling as he took in the sights and sounds around him. Ellie kept her pace slow and steady, her voice a constant source of reassurance. "You're doing great, Chance. See? The world isn't so scary." When they reached a small clearing, Ellie paused and let Chance graze. She watched him as he sniffed the grass cautiously before lowering his head to nibble. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream about the future. She imagined Chance running freely across the fields, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, the weight of his past a distant memory. As they made their way back to the corral, Ellie couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Chance moved with more confidence now, his steps less shaky. Her grandfather met them at the gate, his arms crossed but his expression soft. "He's looking better," he said. "You keep this up, and he might just surprise us all." Not every day was easy, though. There were moments when Chance's old fears resurfaced, triggered by a loud noise or a sudden movement. One afternoon, as Ellie tried to lead him toward the larger paddock, Chance balked, pulling against the rope with all his might. His eyes were wide with panic, and his breathing came in short, sharp bursts. Ellie stopped immediately, letting the rope go slack. "It's okay, boy," she said softly, her heart aching at the sight of his fear. "We don't have to rush this." She spent the next hour simply sitting by the gate, letting Chance see that there was nothing to fear. By the end of the day, he had calmed down enough to take a few tentative steps forward. Ellie didn't push him any further. She knew that building trust meant respecting his boundaries, even when progress seemed slow. For every setback, there were moments of breakthrough that made it all worthwhile. One evening, as Ellie was cleaning the corral, she felt a gentle nudge on her shoulder. She turned to find Chance standing behind her, his dark eyes filled with an unmistakable warmth. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. Chance let out a soft nicker, his first vocalization since coming to the ranch. Ellie's heart swelled with emotion. It was as if he was saying, "I trust you." From that day forward, their bond deepened. Chance began greeting Ellie at the gate each morning, his ears pricked and his steps eager. He followed her willingly during their walks, and his once cautious movements grew more fluid and confident. Ellie's grandfather noticed the change too. "You've got yourself a real partner there," he said one afternoon, watching as Chance trotted alongside Ellie in the paddock. "He's starting to believe in himself again." Ellie nodded, her heart full of gratitude. "And I believe in him," she said. "Every step of the way." As the days turned into weeks, Ellie and Chance developed a rhythm. Their one small steps of progress became steady strides, but the journey was far from easy. Trust was still fragile, and Chance's past traumas lingered like shadows, ready to surface at any moment. Ellie knew that to help him fully heal, she needed to address not just his physical condition but also the fears that had taken root in his soul. One bright morning, Ellie decided it was time to introduce Chance to something new, the larger paddock. Until now, they had stuck to the smaller, enclosed areas where Chance felt safe. But Ellie knew he needed more room to stretch his legs and explore his potential. She prepared the paddock carefully, removing anything that might startle him and scattering small patches of hay to encourage him to explore. "All right, Chance," Ellie said, looping the rope over his neck. "We're going to try something different today." Chance stood still, his ears flicking nervously as Ellie opened the gate. She led him forward slowly, her voice steady and reassuring. "It's just another step, boy. You've got this." The moment they stepped into the larger paddock, Chance froze. His eyes darted around, scanning the open space as if searching for threats. Ellie felt the tension in the rope as his muscles tightened. She didn't pull or push, instead, she let him stand still, giving him time to process the new environment. "Take your time," she murmured, stroking his neck. "Nothing here is going to hurt you." Minutes passed, and slowly, Chance began to relax. His head lowered slightly, and his breathing evened out. Ellie took a step forward, and to her relief, Chance followed. They walked together around the edge of the paddock, Ellie stopping frequently to let Chance sniff the ground or graze on the scattered hay. Each small movement felt like a victory, proof that trust was taking root. Progress, however, was never a straight path. A few days after their successful paddock introduction, Ellie decided to let Chance roam freely within the enclosure. She stood by the fence, watching him move cautiously, his steps still hesitant but more assured than before. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. Then it happened, A loud crash from the barn as a rake fell off its hook. The sudden noise echoed across the paddock like a gunshot. Chance startled violently, his body jerking into a panicked gallop. His hooves pounded the ground as he bolted to the far end of the paddock, his eyes wide with fear. Ellie's heart sank. "Chance," she called, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. She climbed into the paddock slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. Chance stood trembling by the far fence, his body pressed tightly against the wood as if he could escape through it. "It's okay," Ellie said softly as she approached him. "It's just me. You're safe." She stopped a few feet away, crouching low to make herself less intimidating. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them moved. Then, gradually, Chance turned his head to look at her. His eyes were still wild with fear, but there was a flicker of recognition. Ellie extended her hand, her palm open and still. "Come on, boy. You know me." To her relief, Chance took a tentative step toward her. Then another. By the time his nose brushed her hand, Ellie was fighting back tears. She stroked his neck gently, whispering words of comfort. "You're okay, Chance. I've got you." The incident reminded Ellie just how deep Chance's scars ran. She knew it wasn't enough to avoid triggers, she needed to help him face his fears in a controlled, safe way. Over the next few weeks, Ellie introduced Chance to new sounds and objects, each session designed to build his confidence. One day, she brought a plastic tarp into the paddock. She laid it flat on the ground and let Chance approach it at his own pace. At first, he wouldn't go near it, snorting and pawing the ground nervously. Ellie stood by his side, her hand resting gently on his neck. "It's just a tarp," she said. "See? Nothing scary." She knelt down and placed her hand on the tarp, patting it lightly. Chance watched her closely, his ears flicking back and forth. After a few minutes, he took a cautious step forward, then another. Ellie stayed still, letting him investigate the tarp on his terms. When he finally placed a hoof on it, she couldn't help but smile. "Good boy," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "You're braver than you think." These sessions became a regular part of their routine. Ellie introduced Chance to other harmless but unusual items, a ball, a watering can, even her old coat draped over the fence. With each new challenge, Chance grew more confident. His reactions became less extreme, and Ellie noticed a new lightness in his movements. It was as if he was beginning to believe in himself again. Ellie's patience and persistence paid off one crisp autumn morning. The air was cool and filled with the scent of fallen leaves as Ellie led Chance into the paddock. Today, she planned to encourage him to trot, a small but significant step in his recovery. "Let's see what you can do," she said, her voice warm and encouraging. She guided Chance to the center of the paddock and began walking alongside him. Her cues were gentle, her body language calm. After a few laps, she gave a soft cluck and a light tug on the rope. "Let's pick up the pace." Chance hesitated, his ears swiveling back toward her. Ellie kept moving, her steps deliberate and steady. "Come on, boy. You've got this." Finally, Chance broke into a slow, awkward trot. His movements were stiff at first, his legs uncertain, but Ellie didn't push him. She praised him with every step. "Good boy. That's it, Chance." As they continued, Chance's strides became smoother, his muscles loosening as he found his rhythm. By the end of the session, Ellie was beaming. "You're amazing, Chance," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I knew you could do it." Her grandfather watched from the fence, a rare smile softening his weathered face. "You've got yourself a real horse now," he said. "Keep this up, and he'll be ready for anything." That night, Ellie sat by the paddock, watching Chance as he grazed under the moonlight. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, their light casting a gentle glow over the ranch. Ellie felt a deep sense of peace. Chance's journey was far from over, but they had come so far already. She reached out to stroke his neck, her touch light and full of love. "You've taught me so much, Chance," she whispered. "About patience, about trust, about believing in second chances. I promise I'll never give up on you." Chance lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. In that moment, Ellie felt their connection more strongly than ever. They were a team now, partners in every sense of the word. Together, they could face anything. The days on the ranch began to take on a new rhythm, a blend of routine and quiet determination. Ellie poured her energy into nurturing Chance, celebrating even the smallest victories. His once frail body now carried the faint outlines of muscle. His coat, though still scarred, had begun to shine in places, reflecting the care and attention he received daily. "Good morning, Chance," Ellie greeted him one crisp morning, the early sunlight spilling over the corral. Chance's ears flicked in her direction, and he stepped toward the gate, a stark contrast to the frightened horse he'd been weeks ago. Ellie couldn't help but smile as she opened the gate, letting him out into the paddock for their morning routine. Ellie started introducing light exercises to build Chance's strength. At first, it was nothing more than walking him around the paddock, allowing him to stretch his legs and get accustomed to moving freely. Each step was a deliberate effort, both for him and for Ellie, who remained attuned to his every reaction. "Let's try something new today," she said one morning, holding a long lead rope. With her grandfather's guidance, she began lunging Chance in circles, a simple yet effective way to improve his stamina and coordination. Chance was hesitant at first, unsure of the signals Ellie was giving him, but her patient tone and consistent guidance gradually eased his uncertainty. "Good boy," Ellie encouraged as Chance completed his first full circle at a steady walk. She let him rest briefly before signaling again, this time asking for a slightly faster pace. It was clumsy at first, Chance stumbled, his hooves kicking up dirt, but Ellie didn't rush him. Each session brought subtle improvements, and soon, Chance was trotting with a confidence that hadn't been there before. As Chance's strength grew, Ellie decided it was time to introduce him to small obstacles. She set up a makeshift course in the paddock using wooden poles and barrels, creating a simple layout for Chance to navigate. The first time she led him through it, Chance stopped short of the poles, his head low and his body tense. "It's just a pole, Chance," Ellie said softly, stroking his neck. She walked ahead, stepping over the obstacle herself and giving the rope a gentle tug. "See? Nothing to be afraid of." Chance hesitated but eventually followed, his movements careful and deliberate. Ellie praised him with every step, her voice steady and reassuring. Over time, Chance began to approach the obstacles with less hesitation, and Ellie started guiding him through at a slow trot. One afternoon, as her grandfather watched from the fence, Chance successfully trotted over a series of poles without stopping. "He's starting to get the hang of it," Ellie called out, beaming. Her grandfather nodded, his arms crossed. "You're doing good work, Ellie. But remember, it's not just about the horse. It's about the two of you working together." The day Ellie decided to introduce Chance to the saddle felt like a turning point in their journey. She brought the old leather saddle from the barn, its worn edges a testament to years of use. Chance eyed it warily as Ellie placed it on the fence. "Don't worry, boy," Ellie said. "We're just going to take this one step at a time." She started by letting Chance sniff the saddle, giving him time to grow familiar with its presence. Then, she draped a soft blanket over his back, watching his reaction closely. Chance stiffened but didn't move away. Ellie kept her voice calm and steady as she stroked his neck. "That's it, Chance. You're okay." Over the next few days, Ellie gradually introduced the saddle, placing it gently on Chance's back without fastening it. Each session was short and filled with positive reinforcement. When Chance finally accepted the saddle without flinching, Ellie felt a swell of pride. "That's a big step," her grandfather said, leaning on the fence. "He's come a long way." Ellie nodded, her hand resting on Chance's neck. "He's stronger than he looks." As Chance grew more comfortable with the saddle, Ellie began guiding him through exercises while he wore it. She led him around the paddock, gradually increasing the duration of their sessions. Chance's movements became more fluid, his stride more confident. Ellie could feel the bond between them deepening with each passing day. One afternoon, as Ellie practiced leading Chance in the paddock, her grandfather approached with an old bridle in hand. "Think he's ready for this?" he asked, holding it out. Ellie studied the bridle for a moment before nodding. "I think so." Introducing the bridle was another step in their journey. Chance was initially resistant, tossing his head and pulling away. Ellie didn't force him, instead taking her time to let him explore it at his own pace. By the end of the week, Chance was wearing the bridle with minimal fuss, another sign of his growing trust in Ellie. Not every moment was work. Ellie made sure to give Chance time to simply be a horse. She let him graze freely in the open fields, watching as he trotted with a lightness she hadn't seen before. On one particularly sunny day, she even caught him rolling in the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust as he rolled onto his back. Ellie laughed, the sound echoing across the ranch. "You're enjoying yourself, aren't you?" she called, leaning on the fence. Chance lifted his head, his coat dusted with dirt, and let out a soft nicker. Her grandfather, watching from the porch, chuckled. "That's a happy horse if I've ever seen one." Ellie smiled, her heart full. These moments of joy reminded her why she had taken a chance on Chance in the first place. As the weeks went by, Ellie began to see a new horse emerge. Chance's once slouched posture was now upright and strong. His coat, though still bearing the scars of his past, gleamed under the sunlight. Most importantly, his eyes no longer held the deep sadness they once did. Instead, they shone with a quiet confidence, a reflection of the bond he had built with Ellie. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellie stood by the paddock, watching Chance graze. Her grandfather joined her, his hands resting on the fence. "You've done good work, Ellie," he said after a long silence. "He's not the same horse you brought home." Ellie nodded, her gaze fixed on Chance. "He's taught me as much as I've taught him," she said. "And I think he's ready for the next step." Her grandfather raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Ellie smiled, a spark of determination in her eyes. "We're going to show the world what he can do." The crisp morning air was heavy with anticipation as Ellie prepared Chance for the biggest challenge of his journey so far. The paddock had become a familiar and safe space for him, but today they would step beyond its boundaries. Ellie had enrolled them in a small local showcase, a low-pressure event meant to give horses and their riders experience. While it wasn't a high-stakes competition, it marked the first time Chance would be seen by others outside the ranch. "You're ready for this," Ellie whispered, brushing Chance's coat until it gleamed under the rising sun. "We've worked so hard, and today we'll show everyone how far you've come." Chance stood still as she tightened the girth of the saddle, his calm demeanor a testament to the bond they had built. His once dull coat now reflected a healthy shine, and his posture exuded quiet strength. Still, Ellie couldn't help but feel a flicker of nerves. She knew the judgmental stares and whispers they might face at the event. But she also knew Chance had already defied more odds than anyone could have imagined. The event grounds were bustling with activity. Trailers lined the perimeter, and finely groomed horses pranced under the careful guidance of their riders. Ellie felt the weight of every gaze as she guided Chance out of the trailer. The whispers began almost immediately. "Is that the horse from the auction?" a voice asked. "Can't be," another replied. "That one was a skeleton." Ellie kept her head high, focusing on Chance as he surveyed the unfamiliar environment. His ears flicked nervously, and his muscles tensed at the cacophony of sounds, the clatter of hooves, the rustle of tack, the hum of conversations. Ellie rested a reassuring hand on his neck. "It's just noise, boy. You've got this." As they made their way to the warm-up arena, Ellie couldn't ignore the skeptical looks from other participants. One rider, astride a powerful chestnut stallion, smirked as she passed. "Good luck with that," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Ellie bit her tongue, refusing to rise to the bait. She focused instead on Chance, who was beginning to relax as she led him in slow, familiar circles. It's not about them, she reminded herself. It's about us. The warm-up arena was alive with motion. Horses of all shapes and sizes trotted, cantered, and jumped under the watchful eyes of their riders. Ellie guided Chance into the mix, keeping a steady hand on the reins. At first, he hesitated, his steps uneven as he adjusted to the new surroundings. Ellie spoke to him softly, her voice a constant anchor amid the chaos. "Just like we practiced," she murmured, giving him a gentle nudge. Chance picked up the pace, his trot smoothing out as he found his rhythm. Ellie felt a surge of pride as he responded to her cues with increasing confidence. He wasn't the fastest or the flashiest horse in the arena, but there was something undeniable about the way he carried himself, a quiet resilience that couldn't be ignored. Her grandfather, watching from the sidelines, gave her an encouraging nod. Ellie smiled, drawing strength from his steady presence. When their number was called, Ellie took a deep breath, steadying herself. She guided Chance toward the entrance of the main arena, where the course awaited. It was a simple layout, low poles and gentle turns designed for beginners, but to Ellie and Chance, it felt monumental. As they entered the arena, the hum of the crowd fell into a hushed silence. All eyes were on them, and Ellie could feel the weight of their skepticism. She blocked it out, focusing solely on Chance. "You're not that horse from the auction anymore," she whispered. "You're so much more." The course began with a straight trot toward a low pole. Ellie gave Chance a light squeeze with her legs, signaling him to pick up the pace. His steps were cautious but steady as they approached the first obstacle. For a brief moment, Ellie worried he might stop, but Chance surprised her. With a small burst of energy, he lifted his legs and cleared the pole effortlessly. The crowd murmured in surprise, and Ellie couldn't help but smile. "That's my boy," she said, patting his neck. As they navigated the rest of the course, Chance grew more confident with each jump. There were moments of hesitation, pauses where Ellie had to coax him forward, but he never refused. By the time they crossed the finish line, the murmurs in the crowd had turned to scattered applause. Ellie leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Chance's neck. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." Back at the stables, Ellie untacked Chance, her hands trembling from a mix of adrenaline and pride. Other riders passed by, some offering polite nods, others casting lingering looks of curiosity. One young woman stopped and smiled. "That was impressive," she said. "He's got heart." Ellie returned the smile. "He does," she replied. "More than anyone gives him credit for." As Chance grazed contentedly in the warm-up area, Ellie's grandfather approached, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "Told you he'd surprise us," he said, clapping her on the shoulder. Ellie laughed, a sound filled with relief and joy. "I think he surprised himself." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellie sat by the paddock, watching Chance as he moved about. His strides were easy, his posture relaxed. There was a lightness to him now, a sense of freedom that hadn't been there before. "You proved them all wrong today," Ellie said softly. "But more importantly, you proved it to yourself." Chance lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. In that moment, Ellie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for Chance's progress, but for the journey they had taken together. Every struggle, every setback, every small victory had led them to this point. Her grandfather's voice broke the silence. "So, what's next for you two?" he asked, leaning on the fence. Ellie smiled, her gaze never leaving Chance. "The sky's the limit," she said. "We're just getting started." The weeks following the showcase were transformative for Ellie and Chance. The once overlooked horse had become a symbol of resilience and perseverance, and their story began to spread throughout the local community. Riders who had once mocked Ellie now approached her with curiosity and respect, wanting to learn more about the bond she had built with Chance. One morning, as Ellie prepared to clean the paddock, a sleek car pulled up to the ranch. A tall man stepped out, dressed sharply in boots and a pressed shirt. Ellie straightened, brushing hay from her jeans. "Can I help you?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. "You must be Ellie," the man said, extending his hand. "Name's Jack Collins. I organize regional equestrian events, and I've heard quite a bit about you and your horse." Ellie shook his hand, her brows furrowed in curiosity. "We've been working hard," she said cautiously. "What brings you here?" Jack smiled. "I'm here to invite you to the Silver Spur Invitational. It's one of the biggest competitions in the region. We think you and Chance would be a perfect fit." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. The Silver Spur Invitational was a dream for many riders, a chance to prove themselves on a larger stage. But as much as she felt excitement, doubts crept in. Was Chance ready for something so big? "I'll think about it," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. That evening, Ellie shared the news with her grandfather as they sat on the porch, the sun dipping low over the horizon. "The Silver Spur Invitational," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "It's a huge deal, Grandpa. But what if Chance isn't ready?" Her grandfather took a long sip of his coffee before replying. "Ellie, you've already done the impossible with that horse. Don't let fear hold you back. If you believe in him, he'll rise to the occasion." Ellie nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She decided then and there to take the chance, not for glory, but to honor the journey she and Chance had taken together. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. Ellie worked with Chance daily, refining his movements and building his endurance. She introduced more complex obstacles into his routine, pushing him gently but firmly to step outside his comfort zone. Every session was a blend of sweat, determination, and the quiet understanding that they were stronger together. The Silver Spur Invitational arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the air buzzing with excitement. The event grounds were sprawling, with grandstands packed with spectators and a perfectly groomed arena at the center. Ellie felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she unloaded Chance from the trailer. He seemed calm, his dark eyes scanning the bustling surroundings with quiet curiosity. "You've got this," Ellie whispered, stroking his neck. "We've got this." As they warmed up in the practice ring, Ellie noticed the same skeptical glances and whispers they had faced at the showcase. But this time, she felt no need to prove herself to anyone. She focused solely on Chance, who moved with a confidence that filled her heart with pride. When their number was called, Ellie guided Chance toward the arena entrance. The announcer's voice boomed overhead. "Next up, we have Ellie Carter and her horse, Chance, a rescue story that has captured hearts across the region." The crowd murmured, their interest piqued. Ellie took a deep breath, her hand steady on the reins. "Let's show them what you're made of," she said softly. The course was more challenging than anything they had faced before, with towering jumps and tight turns designed to test even the most experienced riders. Ellie's heart pounded as they entered the arena, the cheers of the crowd fading into a distant hum. The first jump loomed ahead, and Ellie gave Chance a gentle nudge with her heels. He surged forward, his stride smooth and powerful. They cleared the jump with ease, and Ellie felt a rush of relief and confidence. As they navigated the course, each obstacle seemed to bring them closer together. Chance hesitated at a particularly high jump, his steps faltering, but Ellie's voice cut through the tension. "You can do this, Chance. I believe in you." With a burst of energy, Chance leapt over the jump, landing gracefully on the other side. The crowd erupted into applause, their skepticism replaced with admiration. By the time they crossed the finish line, Ellie was beaming. She leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Chance's neck. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Back at the stables, Ellie untacked Chance, her hands trembling from a mix of adrenaline and pride. Riders and spectators stopped to congratulate her, their words filled with genuine respect. Jack Collins approached with a broad smile. "That was incredible," he said. "You and Chance are something special." Ellie smiled, her heart full. "He's more than special. He's one of a kind." When the results were announced, Ellie and Chance placed third, a remarkable achievement for a horse many had once deemed worthless. As she accepted the ribbon, Ellie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just a victory for Chance, it was a testament to the power of patience, trust, and belief. That evening, back at the ranch, Ellie stood by the paddock, watching Chance graze under the glow of the moonlight. Her grandfather joined her, his hands resting on the fence. "You've come a long way, Ellie," he said. "And so has he." Ellie nodded, her eyes never leaving Chance. "He's taught me so much, Grandpa. About perseverance, about trust, about believing in the impossible." Her grandfather chuckled. "Well, I reckon he's not done teaching you yet." Ellie smiled, her heart full of gratitude. She knew their journey was far from over. The Silver Spur Invitational was just the beginning. Together, she and Chance had proven that second chances weren't just possible, they were transformative. As the stars twinkled above, Ellie whispered to Chance, "This is just the start, boy. We've got so much more to do." And with that, Ellie and Chance's journey continued, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.